Hello and welcome to the European segment of the third edition of Regeneration International's People's Food Summit. And we're pre-recording this session in Rome at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And we're here with a special guest. Hello. Hi, this is Pam Miller from the International Pollutants Elimination Network. Hi, Pam.
Hello, it's so good to meet you and talk with you today.
So what are we doing in this building today?
This is a meeting of the expert committee of the Stockholm Convention, and the Stockholm Convention is the world's only legally binding mechanism to end the production and use of the world's most dangerous chemicals.
So today you were organizing a side event with three guests. What were you talking about?
We were talking about better ways that the committee and generally the world can assess and move away from dangerous chemicals toward better and healthier systems. That includes agroecological systems, as well as moving away from dangerous chemicals that are used in industries and industrial processes.
So this is the People's Food Summit,
Yes.
and of course we're highlighting the importance of having chemical-free food systems and healthy food for everyone. And in this segment we're going to be presenting today the dangers of pollutants found in food. And so the Stockholm Convention addresses what international policymakers would call the dirty dozen. So it's 12 well-known pollutants that need international regulation around them, and you have worked very hard to get this convention implemented. So could you explain to us what the work and your work on this, how it started and where it is at today?
Yes, we were involved in the very beginning of the negotiations of the Stockholm Convention that did work very hard over several years to ban the dirty dozen, as you mentioned, and these include some of the infamous pesticides and industrial chemicals like DDT and chlordane, PCBs and dioxins and furans. But the real strength of this treaty is that it has provisions to add new chemicals that we know can cause harm to the global environment. And I got involved with this because I live and work in the Arctic, and the Arctic has become a hemispheric sink for these persistent chemicals that move into the north on wind and ocean currents and contaminate the traditional food sources of the Arctic's indigenous peoples. And we know now that the Arctic indigenous peoples are some of the most highly exposed populations on Earth because these chemicals tend to concentrate in the traditional foods of the peoples of the north, and that affects their health and well-being, and these are very serious public health concerns. So protecting the traditional foods of the northern peoples has really been my focus, and these chemicals are endocrine disruptors, and this includes pesticides as well as industrial chemicals. And so we are very interested in getting global bans on these chemicals to protect food systems around the world, and with an emphasis on my part in protecting the traditional foods of the Arctic. Well, at this meeting, we're addressing several chemicals, chemical classes. One is a class of chemicals that's one of the most high production industrial chemicals in the world, known as medium chain chlorinated paraffins, and they're used widely in plastics as plastic additives, plasticizers, and flame retardants, in metal working fluids. So they're a huge high production volume class of many thousands of chemicals that are quite complex. And so this committee is trying to decide how to make a recommendation to the Conference of the Parties of the Stockholm Convention to list this chemical for a global ban. And deliberations are happening at this meeting for that set of chemicals, as well as the pesticide chlorpyrifos, which we know is one of the largest use insecticides in the world. It causes many hazards around the world. And then also another large class of chemicals called PFAS, or perfluorocarboxylic acids, are under consideration here. And all of these chemicals are endangering the food systems of peoples around the world. So we see our work here as really trying to prevent further harm by eliminating these very dangerous chemicals.
So, how are people actually exposed? How are people getting exposed to these chemicals? We understand that a lot of these chemicals are being used in packaging, for instance, for products, but also in the way we produce food. Could you just sort of bullet point us the risks and what people can do about it?
Well, certainly the PFAS chemicals, the per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, are found widely in, as you said, in food packaging. They're found in the environment, so they're taken up because these chemicals contaminate water. So if people are working with water and agricultural systems, the plants can take up these chemicals and cause further harm. With the insecticide chlorpyrifos and other pesticides, it's more direct because these chemicals are applied directly to many of our foods.
Is there a way people can take action either on a local level or maybe a more national, maybe a more global level?
Well, action can be taken from a local to international level, and for instance, in Alaska, we've passed ordinances in our cities and towns that would ban the use of these pesticides and other industrial chemicals and products. So we passed an ordinance, as an example, to eliminate harmful flame retardants that are found ubiquitously in children's products, including toys. We passed an ordinance that requires alternatives to the use of pesticides in our parks and public spaces. So there's a lot that can be done on that level, but ultimately we also need to work together at the international level again, because these chemicals don't respect political boundaries.
Okay, thank you very much,
Yes.
Pam. Thank you.
Very excited to just be a part of this, and I look forward to tuning in and hearing all the other presentations and sharing of information. It's such a fabulous event.
Thank you very much for your work, and we'll be following Regeneration International. Will be following your work as we are today, and we will be doing so in the future. So we're going to go into the first presentation for the People's Food Summit, and we're going to watch a presentation now from Dr. Gilles-Éric Seralini. Dr. Seralini fundraised 3 million euros to do independent research on genetically modified organisms, but also pollutants in food, looking at chemical products in agriculture such as Roundup pesticide. Next up, Gilles-Éric Seralini.
Hello, welcome to everybody. I'm very happy to be here. I'm a researcher passionate by the effects of pollutants on health, not only human health, but mammalian health, because I had to specialize. I've been interested by insects or fishes, and I would have seen also the loss of biodiversity. However, my attention focused on pesticides and GMOs, and I tell you why. This is why there is a baby on the slide. It is because 30 years ago, I wanted to study the effects of known chemical pollutants on health, and I said, we are going to make the point zero. We are going to see on babies what are the pollutants sticked on DNA, really in the deepness of our body. What are the pollutants? So we applied a very new technique to analyze DNA adducts. And I was astonished by the fact that there were more than 400 pollutants molecules directly on the DNA of the fetus. We had to have access to fetal DNA because mothers were giving to us either placentas or umbilical cords, the things that are incinerated anyway for research. They gave that to us. And we detected the abnormal things that were stick on DNA. There was a technique. And what we saw is that there were more than 400. So I said, wow, this is a 0 point. This is a way too much. I will concentrate on the 10 first pollutants, the 10 first chemicals that we can detect. And slowly by slowly, I discovered that 3 were patented by Monsanto. The dioxins that were sold in the Vietnam War in Agent Orange, they were sold to the American government for the Vietnam War. And it was like a pesticide. And also, Monsanto was also making PCBs that are plastic derivatives, and they patented that. And there were a lot of villages making PCBs in factories, and most of the people had cancer. There was even movies on that. So we knew that nanoparticles of plastics since this time were giving cancers because of the work medicine were bad for the body. And we discovered also Roundup residues, which became the major pesticide in the world and the major spread pesticide for agriculture. And then it became even a larger, bigger pesticide with GMOs, because 90% of agricultural GMOs are just made to be Roundup sponges, to tolerate Roundup. So the lobby said resistant to Roundup, but they don't resist. They tolerate Roundup. That means that they can keep it in their cells, in their body, the plants, and we can eat that. And the animals that we are eating are also eating that in the big factories of animals. In the history of humanity, we have never been so numerous on the planet, and they say we need food. So we need food for that reason. In fact, to have industrial food not solve the problem, doesn't solve the problem. It increases the problem of the lack of regular food. And we have so much and even voided on natural resources, the fresh water, the land, the air, the non-polluted air, the petroleum is everywhere. So we have polluted our environment at a maximum by the end of the 20th century, which is really new in the history of humanity. And we have done that in the half of a human life. The 12 major pollutants, they say in French, the big salopards. So that means that they really are known to be nasty, and they also arise on baby genes within the half of a human life, because these products were not chemically existing before the Second World War. And any kilogram of life on Earth does contain these residues. You take insects, you take leaves, plants, even dead leaves in a garden, you take whatever you want, fishes. I took also, penguins from Antarctica, and they do contain these pollutants. So it is spread everywhere on Earth right now. And we have modified the ecosystem so much. This is a fact. So it's the largest extinction of species since the beginning of humans. We have lost about 30%, at least. Some people say 50% of the living species on Earth, because we don't know all of the living species on Earth. And we have also changed the reproduction. So we have modified the hereditary patrimony of living beings, like GMOs, to our pleasure, to or industry, and we have cloned animals. For instance, Japan has spent more than 1 billion for projects to clone cows because they don't have enough land. So we are very much changed the reproduction like never before in the history of humanity. And all of these 5 points make the fingers in a hand make a real nasty change for the first time in the history of humanity. For instance, plastic. Plastic comes from petroleum, it's a petroleum residue, and it's everywhere in our life today. Before it was not in the 19th century. So how is it possible that it was commercialized without seeing this toxicity? In fact, it was seen, and it is seen today by a lot of international researchers, but it was not counted in the economy of the system because there was, and we will explain that today, a massive fraud in the assessment of toxicology, of the toxicology of these products. This fraud is dishonesty that a small number of scientists said in secret that they are okay with environment, these products, and with health, allowed this really widespread international commercialization, and a lot of countries like the United States of America, like Canada, made a lot of money on these products, and the whole economy, all countries' economy were based on this system. It's the same thing for petroleum residues in cars and etc. So my job as a researcher on food pollutants was to discover on baby genes petroleum residues, pesticides, industrial products, dioxins, Roundup residues. This is how I began on Roundup. It is not for my pleasure. It is not because I had something against Monsanto. It's because they were among the 3 major pollutants of babies. Plastic residues, additives, also, we discovered all of that. So I shortly called that ENDS. ENDS because it provokes the end of life, and they include pesticides that are declined as fungicides, herbicides, and insecticides. A few people know, even among scientists, that pesticides have these 3 groups of substances. They, in fact, often, even in English, say pesticides and insecticides. In fact, insecticides is a subgroup of pesticides, and herbicides like Roundup, fungicides, etc., against fungi, they kill life. That's it. They kill anything of life. And if you use Roundup on fungi, it works. If you use Roundup on insects, it works, because they are also heavy metals, nanoparticles, and plasticizers. All that comes from petroleum. They are also heavy metals mines, but in petroleum, there are residues of heavy metals, medical drugs such as synthetic estrogens, and quite often I discovered that the 8 major companies in the world that make these products, so I mean the pollutants, also make medical drugs, because they became the richest companies in the world. They have more than 60% of the whole money of the world. They have more money than any government, than any country. Why is that? Because all the countries have given to these companies a lot of income tax to make war. In fact, they also made toxic compounds. And for the war, like, for instance, Zyklon B for the Second World War that was used by Hitler for the concentration camps to kill the Jewish and many other people. And Zyklon B finished as an insecticide in France, for instance, in the 50s, after the war. So these companies first were making the bombs, the explosives like nitrates that finished in agriculture, and also pesticides that were first the killing gas during the war, or the killing products. They had so much power that they wanted to continue to commercialize this. And after the war, they said, we are going to make the toxicological tests ourselves, and this will be secret. We will show that only to a small number of scientists in the health agencies, but we will not show that to everybody, so any other company cannot copy us, cannot make the same thing. So they became rich because of the war, because the people were poor, because the governments were giving all the money to these companies, to these companies that were just became the major companies of the world, and to make the war, to make explosives, to make toxic compounds. And then they put that in agriculture, like nitrates that were the explosives, and like pesticides to kill the life, but at an insect level. And they said, well, some Nazi really said during the court affairs after the war, well, if that kills the Jewish, but that can kill the insects. So the Nazis were saying, well, if it has killed people, it can kill insects at a diluted concentration, but still at a concentration. And it doesn't kill immediately life, like in a concentration camp, but it bioaccumulates and it stays in the body, and it renders people sick. So I discovered that little by little, and I even wrote a big scientific review to say that endocrine disruptors are all nervous disruptors. So I took the 177 recognized endocrine disruptors by WHO, and I looked at if they had some nervous disruption activity, and they had all of them. And I published that in a big review. So I now call that SPAMs because they act like sand particles in between our cells. We just have two means of communications in our body. The electrical mean, which is taken by the nervous system, and the chemical mean, the hormonal mean, which is taken by the hormonal system. So the so-called endocrine disruptors, it's just a face of the effect of the coin. The other face is that they are nervous disruptors. So we are wondering, why do we have nervous diseases like Parkinson, Alzheimer, etc.? Most of aging people are sick about these products. And we know that it's because of the sand in the nervous system, the sand in between the nervous cells. And we question why we have so many breast cancers and prostate cancers, etc., and other hormonal diseases like diabetes, etc. But it's because even the food contain all these molecules that are not only nervous disruptors, but also endocrine disruptors. And this interrupts little by little our cellular communication. And this is why we are functioning and we are bodies, is because we have cellular communications, like we have computer communications today. So if we look at how many of us have in their close relatives and friends a cancer, a nervous disease, a hormonal disease, and hypofertility, or reproduction or sexual problem, an immune disease like a chronic allergy, it's almost everybody. In fact, already 1 American and 2 has a cancer in his life, and 1 European and 3. And if we add the nervous disease, each family, even when there are only 3 to 4 people in the family, is concerned by a chronic disease at one point or another of their lives. And people are rendered sick, but because it is chronic, because we have to take drugs that the same company are selling, we temporize that. But this implies a loss of biodiversity, which is enormous. So diseases are increasing. The sperm count is decreasing by up to 50 and 80% today from the last 50 years, not from centuries ago. Malformations, baby malformations are increasing by 10. And you have the increase in immune disease and cancer. So you can question the origin of each disease one by one. However, when you look at everything, it is a compilation of diseases that are environmental pathologies linked to the inhibition of cell communication. And to see that is to see the problem. We have a lot of sand, a lot of toxic compounds in between our cells, which is heavy, like petroleum residues, like plastic residues, which is also a petroleum residue. And for instance, here you have baby cells that are desiccated by Roundup at a level where it is not even herbicide, 0.05%, within 24 hours. So it can give, of course, malformations, and the new discoveries that we have made. I have worked during 30 years in this matter, and I've published a lot, and I was defamed a lot by lobbies because of this reason. I have published and explained a lot the mechanism of action of these compounds. And in fact, I saw that there was a potential toxic effect in the commercial formulations below regulatory limits. And I had a real surprise, which I can share with all of you, is that Roundup, so the commercialized herbicide, is 100,000 times more toxic than glyphosate alone, according to the time of exposure, according to the cell line, according to different models, because it was confirmed in many cell lines and in many models. And the first take-home message, it is not glyphosate alone. So most NGOs repeat, like the journal, the media says, the media, like the health agency say, and as they repeat what Monsanto has said first. It is glyphosate, it is glyphosate, it is glyphosate. They repeat that. However, this compound, I checked, is not responsible for toxicity when it is purified. And they give in the code purified to test the toxicity. So it's very high level that it is toxic, and it is almost non-toxic alone. This is why they say in many countries that glyphosate is okay. Our politicians, lobbyists say, without knowing the truth, but glyphosate is okay. However, Roundup is not okay. It is a carcinogen. It is a commercial product. Of course, it has no other name except that it is a glyphosate-based herbicide, but it is the compound which is toxic. And on this basis, the fraud has been discovered even in the Monsanto papers. You know that justice has obliged Monsanto to give 3 million pages of their internal documents, internal secret documents. So we made a very surprising discovery, really surprising, is that the pesticide to which agricultural workers, gardeners, or even people are submitted in the environment is a Roundup or another glyphosate-based herbicide, which is not called Roundup in some countries, in some formulation. There are 400 of Roundup or equivalent products in the world. And we discovered that it is 100,000 times more toxic than glyphosate alone. However, glyphosate alone tests are presented to health agencies. So this is the fraud. The real product is not assessed. Today, a compilation, a big group of 80 NGOs, international 80 NGOs, are really together to try to attack this, because according to the European Court of Justice in 2019, the formulation should be assessed on a long term on a toxicological way. However, it is not. And this is for any pesticide we have checked. And this is today the big thing. So if the company hides fraudulent toxic compounds in the chemical composition, which is the case, the product is carcinogen. However, only glyphosate alone is not at very low levels, and it is sometimes mutagenic, etc. But the real product, the mixture, is carcinogen. Is it due to glyphosate alone? No, because if we use glyphosate alone, we don't have this carcinogenic activity, and it is not because the other products help to penetrate glyphosate in the cells or in the body, because we are radio-labeled glyphosate, and it does penetrate even alone where it wants. It is because the other products are carcinogenic and herbicides and toxic by themselves. What are those? So the first fraud is that repeating that it is glyphosate is playing the game of industry, is playing the game of compromised politicians or politicians who do not understand. There are many in the European Parliament or in the American Parliament also, or because, you know, they come from other activities than really toxicology. But glyphosate is the only declared active patented ingredient. Supposedly active, but not really active. We have discovered the toxicity of non-declared compounds in its formulation. At least 1,000 times, if not 100,000 times more toxic than G alone. And we have confirmed that for many other pesticides, including neonicotinoids. People say neonicotinoids are toxic for bees, but the real toxic products for bees are the commercialized neonicotinoids that are hiding non-declared products. What are those? So we have commercial formulations by science, by mass spectrometry, and we have found thousands of compounds, and they are petroleum residues. They are petroleum garbage. So the red curve, which is in fact, the commercial product, for instance, Roundup in red and glyphosate in black, the red curve is always showing more toxicity, more carcinogenicity than the glyphosate alone or other active principles. For instance, this neonicotinoid imidacloprid or other like tebuconazole, they in black, and the commercial corresponding product is in red. It is always a lot more toxic. So all companies, the 8 big ones, began to be against me because they didn't want to that my science, I was advising a lot of ministers and a lot of health agencies, was taken seriously. So they said, oh no, he's a fraudster. And they continue to say that. This is why I always have defamation court affairs. And I always want, but the journalists, the media are really cautious because they know that, first of all, they are against big companies and they want them to advertise in their journal, but also they don't know, they don't go deep. Some journalists go deep in the subject, but they don't go deep, and often they say, oh, but Cerulni, there is a controversy, he is considered as a fraudster, etc. So this makes a lot of problem in the knowledge of these results. So here are the toxic heavy metals in the formulation. You know, in the Roundup formulations, there is a lot of arsenic in red. Arsenic is a very well-known toxic compound, and it is in petroleum. And we have found that in many Roundups at levels, at very low levels, but at levels enough to give cancers on the long term, and at level enough to be toxic on the long term. This is their secret. They put 1 to 3% petroleum together with the glyphosate, and this makes the toxicity, and this can be herbicide alone. If you put 1 to 3% petroleum in water, you have the herbicide effect, and you have the toxic effect on the long term on any form of life. So we have published in 2022 in a very big scientific journal that the discovery of non-declared petroleum residues in pesticides obliged to revise all the regulatory toxicology. We need this revision because petroleum was added in pesticides since the 19th century. And this is a common way. We have found that in secret documents of many companies. I cite them in this paper. There were the big petroleum sources, natural petroleum sources on Earth. There was no plants around. So they recognized quite rapidly by the end of the 18th century the pesticide effect of petroleum. And you know, we are distilling a lot of petroleum to make petroleum for cars. And there are a lot of residues. And these residues are sold for pesticides, for detergents, and also even cosmetic products made with petroleum, and of course, for plastic. So we have analyzed all of that. Here it is in this paper. And we have seen where it was coming from in the big fractionating towers. It is coming from mixed products. For instance, between gasoline and naphtha, or between kerosene and fuel and diesel, you have mixed products that are not pure enough to be sold for kerosene or diesel, that they don't work so well in engines and mixtures. So they sell that to companies, cosmetic companies, etc. So the petroleum residues that are the garbage of these big fractionating towers, they are used to make pesticides, real pesticide formulation, but they are not controlled and they are not declared. It is a big fraud, and this is why Monsanto has lost 10 billions people. It is a People's Food Summit. So people should know that all this lobby is making a vast fraud, which is not only, it is an economic fraud, it is, but it is a scientific fraud, because the real pesticides have never been assessed on a long term. Only glyphosate alone, and people take that as good. It's glyphosate. You say Monsanto, okay, we will control glyphosate, but Monsanto controls glyphosate alone, and only Monsanto controls glyphosate. Some scientists find all over the world contradictory results with glyphosate alone, with purified glyphosate, but that's stupid. The real product is Roundup, is the pesticide which is used in reality, in agronomy. And it is true for all pesticides. And you know, with the end of the fractionating tower, what they make plastics. Because petroleum is used to make plastic. So all our problem comes from a fraud. And this fraud was settled after the Second World War, when the company says to the countries that were too poor to make their own toxicological test, okay, you are too poor, we will make it. So the companies make the toxicological test, but we will keep that secret. So you imagine that the blood analysis of rats are secret. You imagine that the blood analysis of rats, because they are not done in humans, are, well, they were done at the Second World War, but not now, are secret. And it is a big and vast problem. So the industrial secrecy should not, and this is one of my solutions, be applied to toxicological tests. And it is right now. They even go in court. We won against Monsanto for GMO, because GMOs are toxic because of these petroleum residues that they contain a lot. We discovered the deep reason for the toxicity of GMOs. We are just eating petroleum every day in all this garbage, in all this garbage food with pesticides and with GMOs. And they are undeclared products. So we have, for instance, measured the difference between organic and non-organic food. It is one of the first and unique studies to measure PAH, so that means polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or petroleum residues coming from pesticides. We have detected that in organic and non-organic food. And you know what? All of these products, for all of these pesticides, we have measured a lot of pesticides also. And we have concluded that, to give a short conclusion, organic food was 80,000 less toxic than industrial food. So the industrial food, like sausages, like cheese, the industrial food is full of petroleum residues, especially the fast food and the food which is sold in big commercial companies, because it's cheaper. And you know why it is cheaper to put petroleum and pesticides in food? It should be a lot more expensive, because, you know, there is a lot of chemistry. Just because intensive agriculture using pesticides has a lot of financial help from countries. In fact, the major part of our income tax goes to industrial agriculture. And this is why the cheap food is full of industrial residues and plastic. But it should be a lot more expensive than garden food. However, it is, in fact, full of petroleum residues because this is financially supported by countries and by European communities, by American community, by Indian or Chinese community. They give a lot of money to support intensive agriculture, and 2% of the money, 2 to 5% of the money goes to organic agriculture because they tax a lot the work, but they don't put tax or so little on petroleum residue, and they help petroleum agriculture. They help a lot this petroleum agriculture, and only a few people in the world have understood that it comes from petroleum residues in food. Most of our communication disorders, most of our health problems, I say cancer, nervous disease, immune disease, endocrine disease, etc. All of that comes from the fact that they put disgusting sand in between our cells, little by little. We have understood all that. So non-organic products are 80,000 times more toxic than organic products, not because it's good to be organic, not because there are more vitamins. They have more vitamins. Industrial food does contain a lot of particulates, a lot of so-called sand, like sand, in between our cells. So it's like a spam of cell-cell communication, and these particles are just, in fact, polluting our system and giving big chronic diseases we suffer from that. Cancers, nervous disease, immune disease, etc. And we have seen that non-organic products containing these disgusting particulates are really, petroleum waste, are really 80%, 80,000 times more toxic than organic products that do not contain this product. Of course, because of the air pollution, organic products may contain a few residues of petroleum gas, but a lot less, 80,000 times less. And at this level, our body is able to detoxify because we have a lot of natural cells, I will come back on that, that are in favor of the detoxification of our health. Let's put it in 2 words. Organic is orgasmic. So that means that it gives a lot of love to our body, while non-organic, I don't care about the label, but non-pesticide is very good, and pesticide-rich food, which is most of the industrial food, is because there are a lot of chronic diseases not orgasmic at all, because all families are suffering from that. So why it is necessary to eat organic food? And once again, I don't care about the label, I care about the non-contaminated food. You can have farm food, like in many countries, country food with no pesticides, and which will be a lot better. If you put intentionally pesticides on food, it will be heavily more contaminated. So usually the TVs, etc., say eat fruits and vegetables, but they just forget, for these reasons, to say non-contaminated fruits and vegetables. Because if you eat pesticide-rich fruits and vegetables, you give cancer to the body, and you eat fruits that are poisoned, so almost 250 pesticides a day, and that will render you sick within a decade, within 10 years. So the second take-home message, this is all due to a fraud, an economic fraud. So declaration of the wrong active ingredients in pesticides, glyphosate, for instance, it is a wrong active ingredient, and no declaration of real active ingredients or declaration as inerts, like adjuvants or additives, and confidential. This is the fraud. Monsanto was condemned for 10 billions for 100,000 patients in the States recently because of this fraud. Non-declared products in the label of the Roundup, on the label of Roundup. And this was the major fraud. To be simple, there is a no declaration on the label. To be true, there are toxic products in the pesticide, the formulated, the commercialized pesticide, which are not in glyphosate, but which are in an obliged manner together with glyphosate always, because all pesticides are made from petroleum and with a little bit of petroleum garbage. And this is a secret. So why are GMOs toxic on the long term? You have understood. They are made to contain a lot of pesticides. You know, most scientists speak about GMOs and evolution and what could be done, but what is really done, I have written a book on that, what is really done in the closed lab is to understand the role and the function of genes, and that scientists want to keep it. This is why most scientists are for GMOs, and it is also used to make some medicinal drugs. However, the GMOs cultivated in the world, to which people are submitted, people face cultivated GMOs, they are 99% of GMOs, and rich agriculture. So that means that, for instance, Roundup Ready soya, Roundup Ready maize, or BT maize, which produce its own insecticide, are just modified to be able to contain a lot of pesticides. Without pesticides, GMOs, for instance, you have here the numbers, 56.6% today are herbicide tolerant. The lobby would say herbicide resistant, but they don't resist to pesticide. They are cultivated with it. They don't die. So they are sponges made with pesticides. These vegetables, these food, these cereals, and this is what our meat eat in factories. For instance, chickens that are in closed areas, or cows, most of the cows that are raised to be in factories in the States to make our burgers and all that, in their meat, in their urine, you find a lot of glyphosate, in even people urine today. So, okay, Monsanto doesn't do the test with Roundup in its commercial form. And right, we did it. But we had to have a lot of money that was raised by crowdfunding. The biggest crowdfunding, because I am an author and I made some explanations to food companies, the biggest crowdfunding ever made in Europe, 3 million euros. And this allowed me to pay 8 persons during 2 years to take care of rats and to make the blood analysis and the nervous analysis and so on. And what I saw, I republished that because Monsanto paid the editor-in-chief, Wallace Ace, of the first journals where I published. They paid him a lot to retract the paper, and it is now obvious there were even explanations of that in the scientific studies. So the rats on the long term have tumors, but not only. They are sick about kidneys and livers. Their kidneys and livers are really sick, and this is why the rats die before the controls. And I discovered that. So it's really like particles of petroleum waste within any cell. You know, the breast, the mammary gland for rats contain a lot of fat, and these petroleum residues stay in the fat. This is why they are tumors and they are breast cancers. And so the females mainly deceased when they were eating GMOs or Roundup of mammary tumors, but because they were big mammary tumors, I didn't have the right to operate and to remove them, but because this was heavy in their internal organs, but also their liver and kidneys were sick, like I said. And you see, here are the tumors. In red with Roundup, 0.1 ppb. So it's a lot more than in Canada or in the States in water. These, we knew that it was also in GMOs. We knew that this Roundup alone in water at very low levels, they were not drinking only Roundup, they were drinking 0.1 ppb, which is authorized for humans, of Roundup in water. And during 2 years, which is the lifespan of a rat, and it is a lot more than control. So we confirm that a lot, because beside what the company did against us, we worked on omic techniques, transcriptomic, metabolomic, proteomic techniques, and we saw that the genetic damage was coming from petroleum residues and oxidative stress in the cells. So insecticide plants like Bt maize, the same thing. This is a farm, the only German farm, where we had the crude data, the raw data, recognized for quality, but this farmer was not against GMO. He was giving Pactol CB, which was one of the first GMO that was ever used in Europe. Bt maize, Bt corn, if you want, and he was cultivating himself the GMOs because he was helped financially by companies to do that. And we did a pathology report of the first cows fed with Bt maize. And what we saw is that there was a correspondence between the quantity of Bt maize, insecticide plant, insecticide modified to create its own insecticide in the plant, and the death of the animal. Because there was a problem at the mucosa level in the animal. And we see the correspondence between the black here and the red curve, the death and the Bt maize, the consumption of the Bt maize. And here it is general health of the animals. The details are there. I will give the slides. I can show the slides again. Liver metabolism and kidney metabolism was assessed. And of course, there was abnormal things. And what happened in cows? Why did they die previously? Why did they die before other cows? Because there were paralysis and because they were losing, this is with BT maize and this is without, you know, the really the nose of the cow is not the same, but they have lost their mammary gland. There was an epithelial mucosal problem here, and here they are losing. Sorry, sorry for these disgusting pictures, but they are published. And I did that with the farmer who is in fact, who was in fact engineer for agronomy, and the cows are losing their mammary glands, you know, and this was checked. They had no bacteria or viral or virus infection. There was transgenic BT DNA, and it was found in the milk of the dairy cows in general by the Technical University of Munich. So people who have understood have fighted a lot against Monsanto because they were understanding, no, it is called Bayer Monsanto if you want, or Monsanto Bayer. You know that after the Second World War, it was already called Mobile. It was a joint venture. So it is like a stupid thing. These big companies, they're Aventis, Ron Poulenc, there are others. But all these people recognized as a fraud, and 100,000 patients won 10 billion in the States. However, on other continents, this is why I take time to speak at the People's Food Summit. It's because in other continents, people don't know. People don't use the justice to go to court and to say, hey, Monsanto, you've made a fraud. Hey, Bayer, you've made a fraud, vast fraud. And to other companies of pesticides also, because you never made the toxicological test of your product, your real product, which is really used in agronomy. You never made the long-term toxicological testing. And you are obliged according to the European law, and you are obliged according to other laws to do that. So I have explained all of that in many books and scientific papers, of course, but books like, you know, here with Robert Kennedy, the book that I made by myself on the Monsanto papers, because I was cited 56,000 times in the Monsanto paper. It is, I am called a whistleblower because of that. It is a real story on how the big companies defame scientists that find some toxic compounds in their products, and I am in the heart of this. The book was translated, here you see, in German, here in Spanish. So most people may have the book and have even the references of the Monsanto paper, because there is a flash code and you can have access to the real document. And we have also the scientific papers that are cited, but it is they are book wrote for anybody. And you also, I have my website, or the website of the 80 NGOs that are united to explain the fraud of all the companies and to take them in court. This is pretty long. I would like to conclude in this story. All health agencies were against me because they authorized the pesticides on the wrong basis. And they say that, in fact, the declared active principle that the company like glyphosate should be tested alone. Well, they don't say anything, but they don't ask to the company to test the Roundup, which is a major fraud. So they recognize the insufficiencies in statistics of the companies, but they consider, if you look for the renewal, which is actually this year on stand at the European level, they say, oh, yes, they are lax. However, it is not enough to forbid glyphosate. And in fact, we say, we should say, we don't care about glyphosate. We care about Roundup or Roundup-like products containing glyphosate if you want, but even containing other pesticides, they should be assessed on the long term as a full mixture. And it is not a mixture effect, it is the effect of petroleum garbage, which is mixed with pesticides. You know Rachel Carson, the big scientist who was one of the first one writing books on that in the States in the 70s. But she said that petroleum in her book, Silent Spring, that was republished in many languages, she explained that they make pesticides with petroleum, but people don't have taken the hurt of that for the regulatory affairs, because there is a lot of economical fraud about that, and that makes the 8 biggest companies the richest in the world, more than actually any government on the planet, any country on the planet. So there are a lot of conflict of interest, confidentiality, and censorship. As I said, the blood analysis of the rats are confidential. This is completely stupid in science. Science should be open. And we have a secret science regulating the world. So it is a fraudulent science. It is not science. And people think they are in the kingdom of science. And we should be out of that. So no, there was a part of my lab working for a long time on detoxification. I would like to say a few words on that to finish, because are they global solutions to be out of that? Yes. You know, for PCBs, the plastic residues from Monsanto, there were even big court affairs in the States. Write PCB on your computer and look at court affairs in the States, and you will see that they have made huge frauds. And it is also the case for Roundup. And so we need structural transparency. We need to have the toxicological tests of the international company. Otherwise, we are living in their kingdom. We are living in their kingdom, because it is the case today. And at an individual level, how can we do to promote detoxification? It's a long-term thing. It is not a one-day thing. To clean up the intimacy of ourselves from all this petroleum garbage, which comes from plastic, which comes from pesticides, which come from heavy metals, which are in petroleum garbage also. We need to stimulate our own system. First of all, we have to know that We are a standing piece of soil. We are an ecosystem. We have more microbial cells in our body than human cells. We have about at least 10,000 more bacterial cells, and we have discovered in our intestine 10,000 more than human cells. But we have discovered, my group has discovered a few years ago, that there are yeasts that are in the intestine, in the microbiota, but they are only 1% of the bacterial, but still they are as numerous as our human cells. Mushrooms, if you want, microscopical mushrooms, yeasts, but there are many varieties, more than the varieties that help us to make cakes or flour, or to cook flour. We have many yeasts, and in fact, they organize the useful bacteria in us, which are necessary for our nervous system, for our endocrine system, for our digestion, of course, but also for our body, our immune system, and our general health. It is organized by our intestine. And they eat before us. And of course, they leave only the useful bacteria to inhabit, to coexist with us. We are an ecosystem on legs. We are an ecosystem on legs. This is why we have to respect the ecosystem. We are not just humans. We are an ecosystem because we have more other cells than human ones in our body, and especially yeasts. And they have a lot of enzymes, of natural enzymes, but also that are also present in our human cells, but that are more available in our intestine. The famous cytochrome P450 enzymes that are able to digest petroleum residues and pollutants. And slowly by slowly, they can encompass, they can overpass the human cell capacity. However, they are not functioning very well because they are also killed by pesticides and by the industrial life products. This is why we have a lot of intestinal diseases, also inflammations and intestinal digestion problem. We should eat natural food, and we should eat food without pesticides, or without pesticides as most as possible, because this is the heart of the problem. And then these enzymes can detoxify us. So, in conclusion, we should change the international regulatory toxicity for transparency. The toxicity of a pesticide is increased at least by 1,000 by its formulation, the non-declared products in the pesticide. And, you know, since the beginning of humankind, here you see the coevolution of microbiota. We have integrated by symbiosis microscopical cells that have helped, as well as cats and dogs, that have helped our health. This is why we are the survivors of these persons. And we are still exchanging the microbiota with animals today. So yeasts allow our digestion, and they allow what we eat to exist, like bread, like beer, like wine, like cheese, etc. But we are also using fermentation inside our body to help to digest things. Thanks to that, to allow us to digest the food so that we can incorporate it in our body. Otherwise, we cannot. And these yeasts and bacteria that are chosen often by yeast are really useful for our health. So there are many more species than we ever think, than Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is used to make cakes. There is, for instance, Saccharomyces boulardii and others. They play an antioxidant role. They have enzymes to detoxify, and they have learned that before us, so we should use them. So they inhibit pathogenic bacteria, they coordinate inside symbiosis, they favor fermentation, they help the natural micronutrition, Sportsmen, sportswomen, women use micronutrition, but it's just rediscovering nature. And the microbiota eat before us, but thanks to that, because we can digest them, a compound. So all that we eat is fermented by yeast and is helped in its digestion. So I have written a review in 2023 this year, and I give you that as a gift. And I have written books on the human gut fungiome, which is the whole yeast system in our microbiota, and its role in physiology and detoxification. And when we eat plants, natural plants from a garden like that, it's from Jérôme Douzelet, my co-author, who is a cook. We have natural yeast already on the plant, already on the salad, on the fruit, on the vegetables. We have natural yeast present everywhere in a natural, non-compromised environment. And it is important. We can make a lot of good desserts, for instance, a lot of good things with organic products. This is a case in a seminar that I organized at Le Mas Dérivé, Jérôme Douzelet's place. And thus, the cuisine this way is alive. More than half of what we eat could be from gardens according to the season today. So please do it. We should help natural cooking, natural gardening, instead of all this industrial garbage and shit that we have. So this is why I write with the cook, Culinary Pleasures of Hidden Poisons. This is an Australian edition of our book. We have Australian, Indian, Japanese translations of our book. And this is the book that summarizes all the science I explained in English, with a pre-word of Robert Kennedy, who is actually in competition for the presidency. But anyway, he probably will not make it because of the lobbies. But anyway, it's to say he was in the lawyers group who won against Monsanto. And this is the main thing. And it is in Spanish too. So thank you. So the industrial secrecy and toxicology is killing us. It should be known why. I try to explain why. Everything is in English in my website, which is written in red here. And we know that today we have all the solutions, especially with natural food and microbiota and yeast containing that, dozens of species and varieties that are important today. I would like to thank you and I will remain close to you. However, we are in a sick world, but with the help of some of you, we can transform it to a people's world. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Gilles-Éric, for that keynote presentation on the dangers and effects of petrochemical additives found in Roundup and the dangers on human health from genetically modified organisms. Before that, we were presenting from the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome with the International Pollutants Elimination Network, where we were on a side event of the Stockholm Convention. Participating in this side event was our international director, Dr. André Leu. Unfortunately, the FAO did not grant us authorization to film his presentation, so we've had to film the presentation outside of the building. So, André Leu, the floor is yours.
It's good to be back here in Rome and at FAO. I was introduced as Dr. André Leu, the International Director of Regeneration International. My doctorate is in agricultural and environmental systems. But equally importantly, I'm a farmer. I've been an organic farmer for more than 50 years, and I'm still a farmer, and I produce commercial quantities of organic fruit, in fact, many tons every year, without using any toxic synthetic pesticides. On top of that, I have had experiences in farming systems in more than 100 countries. One of the major issues in this meeting, this United Nations meeting, is about banning chlorpyrifos. So I'd like to start with that. And particularly, the really important issue is that the scientific research shows that the smallest amounts of pesticides affect the normal development of the nervous system in the fetus and children. And this is because the developing fetus and children do not have the same detoxifying liver enzymes that we have as adults. Therefore, they have the inability to detoxify the smallest amount of pesticides. And the research shows that there is no safe level of these pesticides for these age groups. There are multiple studies that show that the smallest amounts of organophosphate pesticides, of which chlorpyrifos is in this family, cause damage to the development of the brain, of the nervous system. The brain is the biggest collection of nerves, and what these studies show that it affects the development of the brain and consequently reduces the IQ of children who have been exposed to the smallest amounts. There are multiple studies looking at chlorpyrifos, and one of the most important shows that exposure to amounts of chlorpyrifos way below what is regarded as scientifically safe cause measurable brain damage. This is MRI scans, pictures of MRI scans of the brains of children. And these show the areas that have been damaged by their mother's exposure to the normal residues of chlorpyrifos. These are the amounts of chlorpyrifos that are found in food that the regulatory authorities say are safe. These mothers ate the normal American diet. They thought they were being healthy by eating fresh fruit and vegetables, but unfortunately, because of the nature of these pesticides, the more fresh fruit and vegetables that people eat with these pesticides, the worse the damage is for their children. And this study alone should be enough for this toxic chemical to be banned. However, very importantly, I want to say there is no need for these toxic chemicals in agriculture. We have very good science showing that soil health can solve up to 80 to 90% of pest and disease problems. And this is because most pests and diseases are opportunistic. They attack plants that are stressed. And healthy plants put out a range of compounds to protect themselves from pests and diseases. The science shows that correctly balanced soils ensures that healthy plants have minimal disease and insect damage. This is an example. This is a field trial, and it's the same soil, the same variety of wheat that is being grown there. There's the same level of fungal spores that cause rust. However, the wheat that's been grown with compost, and this is compost made by farmers on their farms, does not have rust, whereas the field that's been grown with synthetic chemical fertilizers and it's been supervised by agronomists from the local universities has been badly affected by the rust and needed to be sprayed with fungicides, otherwise they wouldn't get any yield. And despite spraying it with fungicides, the wheat grown with the synthetic fertilizers only achieved 1.6 tonnes a hectare. On the other hand, the wheat grown with compost resisted the rust and yielded over 6.5 tonnes per hectare. And this is because compost is not just a fertilizer, it is a complex inoculant of millions of species for the soil microbiome that protects host plants from pests and diseases. This is a very good long-term scientific trial. It was published as a peer-reviewed study by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, and it looked at over 900 samples over 5 years. So there's a high level of confidence in the study. And what it showed is that the crops grown with compost had more than double the yield, more than 100% increase in yields over the traditional systems. The green bar is the compost. The smallest bar on the left-hand side is traditional system, and the bar on the right-hand side of the compost are the trials that were supervised by agronomists and grown with chemical fertilizers. In every case, the compost had higher yields than the chemical fertilizers. This is good evidence-based science showing how soil health increases yields and reduces the need for pesticides. This is a picture of a papaya, and in Australia, papaya and many other crops get attacked by a very devastating pest called the fruit spotting bug. And for many, many decades, Australian farmers fought to keep endosulfan, stating it was the only pesticide that kills fruit spotting bugs. And they used the worn-out mantra, we will lose our crops without it. Australia was the second last country to ban endosulfan. And despite years and years, actually decades of saying, oh, we need it, we'll lose crops, when it was banned, no crops were lost. And this is always the case. There's always this thing, oh, we have to keep the pesticides, we'll lose production, we'll lose costs. Every time they're banned, there's no evidence of loss of crops because there are always better ways than using synthetic pesticides. This is a picture of papaya on my farm. I'm a commercial grower. And the bottom part of it, you can see the damage done by the fruit spotting bug. In fact, it will kill papayas if it's not controlled. And then you look above the arrow and you can see that the papaya is clean. There's no damage. You can see the fruits being set. I didn't spray anything. I just fixed up the soil health. And once you improve the soil health, healthy plants put out protective compounds. We have very good science on this. In this case, the protective compounds, they don't kill the pest. They make it sick. They slow it down. And this enables the beneficial species the chance to easily find it and basically use it as food. So here's pictures of multiple beneficial species that we have in farms, such as hoverflies, ants, little birds, frogs, spiders. The picture at the top are the eggs of a parasitic wasp that's been laid on a caterpillar. The wasp stings the caterpillar, paralyzes it, and the eggs then lays the eggs for its young to eat. The really important thing here is when we spray synthetic fertilizers, so when we spray synthetic pesticides and chemical fertilizers, we kill beneficial species. And this locks farmers into perpetual spraying of pesticides. The better thing to do is to use agroecology and change our farms, bring in functional biodiversity, the host plants for the beneficial species. Some of the most important are flowers, because a lot of these beneficial species, such as parasitic wasps, hoverflies, lacewings, have carnivorous larvae that eat the pests. However, the adults need nectar and pollen. And if you see in these pictures, you can see the parasitoids, the little wasps here. They're feeding on nectar and pollen. They use it as food source. It's rich in sugars and rich in protein, but also they put out these parahormones, these compounds that they need to become sexually active and reproduce. And when they reproduce, the female will then lay her eggs. She'll sting the caterpillar here, it paralyzes it, lays her eggs in the caterpillar, and then when her babies hatch, the larvae, they will feed on the caterpillar and emerge. And that way they will control the pests, but also we get more parasitic wasps. But if we don't have flowers, those larvae cannot develop into adults, and we break the whole reproductive cycle. So it's essential that we introduce flowers into our farming systems because they provide nectar, pollen, mating sites, and refuges for beneficial insects. This is a picture of our farm. I've used a high contrast pictures here because I wanted people to see the effect of what we're doing here is using sunlight to provide multiple ecosystem services. The flowers in this system host beneficial species. They are what we call insectivories. But there are other ecosystem functions in this. The root exudates from these ground covers, these cover crops, build soil fertility and soil health. Using legumes means that we get all our nitrogen for free. We don't have to use nitrogen fertilizers. They suppress unwanted plants, weeds that we don't want, gives us pest control. Very importantly, it shades the ground to reduce evaporation. We call this a living mulch, and it cools the soil by stopping direct sunlight. So it makes a big difference. The soil doesn't get overheated, so the roots can grow without being damaged. Really importantly, we increase the efficiency of the farm by capturing the sunlight not used by the cash crop. This system provides multiple ecosystem functions that are powered by solar energy. There are other ways of managing our crops by providing insectaries. And one of the most important ways is called strip mowing. And if you look at this picture, you can see the difference in the amount of beneficial species, the natural enemies of our pests. There's more predatory spiders, more predatory bugs, parasitic wasps, lady beetles, and lacewings. And this is how we do it on our farm. We mow in strips and leave areas of insectaries where we've got a high diversity of plants, of flowering plants, and we mow it in stages. So where you can see the insectary on the top picture, at some point that will be mowed down, but there'll be other areas that have grown up with the flowers. On the bottom picture, you can see an insectary that essentially we grew over our rainy season, and next to it is one of our crops called the lychees. And when they flower, that's the time we need to protect them from pests, because if the pests eat the flowers, we do not get fruit. So what we do with this insectary is we slowly strip mow it. We do it in stages. And each time we mow a strip, that forces the beneficials out into the flowers to control the pests. So this way we can manage our pest control of our flowers at critical times. We can time it and have control over the system so that we get very good fruit set without pest damage. There are other ways of doing this, and this is a very good system called push-pull. It's used to control stem borer in maize. Maize is the most important food crop in the planet. It's the #1 crop in the whole of the Americas, and it's the #1 in Africa. In Asia, it's the #2 after rice. Now, everywhere maize is growing, it gets attacked by stem borers. And normally this is treated by spraying toxic pesticides, or lately by having genetically modified plants that actually put out toxic poisons. In this case, instead of doing that, we add functional biodiversity. It's a plant called Desmodium, and Desmodium puts out protective compounds that repels the stem borer moth. In this system, as well as having the Desmodium that repels the moth, we have what's called a trap crop that the moth prefers. So the moth will lay its eggs here, and this is called Napier grass. There's a range of other grasses we can use. They have sharp silica hairs and also sticky exudates. The moth will lay its eggs here. The eggs hatch, little caterpillars get caught up in the sticky exudates, and the sharp silica hairs, silica is glass, cuts the caterpillars and kills them and breaks the cycle. Similarly, Desmodium puts out another range of compounds that causes the suicidal germination of weed seeds. So here you can see an example. The traditional system, this is in Africa, it's a parasitic weed called striga, and also the damage that gets done by the corn borer. So the traditional system is very low yielding. Just by adding Desmodium, control the striga, the main parasitic weed, and it controls the stem borer. So you can get up to 10 times the traditional yield by adding this functional biodiversity. This system now has been applied to all different sorts of crops. You can use it on every grain. Here you can see it used in chili. They've got it in the chili, and then the border of the chili, the Napier grass. This is a mango orchard. You actually have the Napier grass and the Desmodium in here, and also they use alfalfa, which is a very good insectary plant as well, and they get perfect mangoes without any damage. There are sometimes the need for sprays, particularly when farmers are starting to set up these ecological systems. It takes time to grow all the host plants, to build up all the beneficials and get the ecology. In that time, people will need a way to protect their crops. What we'd like to say is that spraying pesticides and fungicides should be regarded as the tools of last resort, not the tools of first resort. That's the way that they're used in industrial agriculture. In fact, they're actually used as the tools of only resort. They don't use ecological systems. We like to say that ecological systems and soil health are the first and the primary ways to control pests and diseases. And then as a backup, you can use spray management. The best sprays to use are completely non-toxic, things like edible vegetable oils, flour and water, mild soap, clay and water. These are completely non-toxic. No one is going to get sick from it. They don't poison the insect. They just smother them. Insects have these very small little breathing pores, and these block them and cause the insects to basically suffocate. There are a range of natural minerals like sulfur, copper sulfate, baking soda that can be used as fungicides, miticides. These are all natural and used properly do not cause any problems whatsoever. Also, essential oils is a range of what we call botanical pesticides that come from plants. And essential oils such as eucalyptus oil or lavender oil is a whole range of these oils can make very useful pesticides and fungicides. The most powerful is called natural pyrethrum. It comes from the chrysanthemum. It's been used actually for thousands of years. The Chinese have been using it traditionally. And natural pyrethrums, it's here the word is plural, pyrethrums. It's not one. It's a mixture of multiple pyrethrums. And every year, to stop the insects from becoming resistant to it, the the chrysanthemums change the mixture of pyrethrums. So as the insect starts to get resistant to one batch, the next batch is different. And so there's no insect that is resistant to natural pyrethrums. So it will control everyone. The other really important thing is without having the synthetic synergist, piperonal butoxide, which is very toxic, it should not be used. But just using natural pyrethrums, there's no residues after 48 hours. It just breaks down and there's nothing on the food, nothing to harm the environment. There's a lot of biological pesticides, and these are specific to the pests. So, for instance, Bacillus thuringiensis varkostaki just controls caterpillars, doesn't kill anything else. There This is a list of some of them. There are many of them. They're very effective. Apart from the biologicals, which will only kill the pest, all the others are broad spectrum. They will kill all the insects, and that includes the beneficial insects. So never do a complete cover spray over the crop, because you'll kill the beneficials. And once you do that, farmers are locked into endless losing spray battles because they have no beneficials, no natural enemies to control their pests. So there's a very good IPM technique called hotspot spray. And that is because the pests aren't evenly distributed over the crop. They're in clusters. We call these hotspots. Just monitor it, the crop, find out where these hotspots are, and just spray these areas. Leave all the other areas alone. That way you don't kill all the beneficials, and the beneficials in those areas then will control the remaining pests. And that way you can ensure that you have a healthy population of beneficial species. And lastly, I want to end with this and say that toxic synthetic pesticides are not needed. Last year, the Rodale Institute published its 40-year report on its farming systems trial. And they showed that the regenerative organic fields had higher yields than the industrial agriculture systems that use synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. In fact, on every criteria that they analyzed, the regenerative organic was better. So this shows that we have the science and the evidence that by scaling up these systems, there is no need for any synthetic toxic pesticide or fertilizer in farming whatsoever. And this should be our priority. We should be scaling up these systems and banning every single toxic synthetic pesticide. Thank you.